closer look at Durable Inequality by Charles Tilly. In order to take a closer look at this, I wanted to start us off with a specific quote from a little later in the book. In fact, I think it's right at the end of chapter 2, when Tilly makes an interesting point. He says, "Concepts are tools. Their values depend on whether they do the job at hand. Just as a crystal shovel looks lovely but remains useless for digging coal, elaborate concepts sometimes glitter alluringly but break down when put to work." So let's keep in mind that this is a highly conceptual text, and I'm going to try to give you some more concrete ways of thinking about them, but first we have to get the concepts down. And I like Durable Inequality. I like this text quite a bit because I think that what Tilly does is answer a lot of our questions that we have about the complexity of inequality and the complexity of how these concepts that keep groups, individuals, and others separate from one another, and what it actually means for equality and inequality to exist. I think he does that by putting it into a really nice perspective. He says, "The task at hand is to explain the emergence, survival, and change of categorical inequality." And this is going to be important because it's a particular kind of inequality that he's talking about. "And then to ascertain how much of what appears to be individual to individual inequality actually results from categorically organized differences." So we have, again, another way of saying categorical inequality. "Let us see how well the tools discussed here can help us do the explanatory job." So we are trying to explain how categorical inequality emerged, survives, and changes. Okay? And we are specifically interested in how that happens in education worldwide. Right? So we have an education focus. So when we apply this, when we apply these concepts, we are going to be looking at education. All right. I think that's a good challenge for us. First of all, what does he mean by durable inequalities? Right? Durable inequalities, he says right up front, are those that last from one social interaction to the next, with special attention to those that persist over whole careers, lifetimes, and organizational histories. So a durable inequality is not something that happens once and is done, or something that is increasingly variable and changes from one situation to the next. No, there's particular emphasis on persistence in inequality. That's what makes them durable, because they endure. And it makes them span across time as well as location as well as organizational culture. So we've got inequality across time, across location, across culture. Right? That's going to be very important because it's these durable inequalities that are going to really make the most impact. When they endure in that way, then they are increasingly difficult, A, to identify because they become taken for granted, and they're increasingly difficult to eliminate because they become normative. So when you have normative inequality, you have inequality that is taken for granted. And when it's taken for granted, it means that it is not overtly recognized, or it's not constantly on someone's radar. It usually means that there is a manufacture of consent, which we talked about when we were looking at Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed the other day. Excuse me. Now, a little later in the book, on page 25, Tilly very specifically identifies what he means by human inequality. What is inequality, right? And he says, in general, it consists of the uneven distribution of attributes among a set of social units, such as individuals, categories, groups, or regions. Social scientists properly concern themselves especially with the uneven distribution of costs and benefits, that is, goods broadly defined. Right? Uneven distribution of costs and benefits, goods broadly defined. So when we talk about inequality, we're really talking about a form of uneven distribution of goods, which can be costs and benefits. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a good is something that is tangible all the time, right? Sometimes we'll talk about goods and we mean actual products. So I'm holding a coffee cup right now. That is a good, and I can buy it, But he's talking about things that are exchangeable, that have costs and benefits. So instead of being tangible, they're exchangeable. And if you can exchange them for different costs and acquire different benefits, that becomes an uneven distribution of inequality. Right? When he says sets of social units, including individuals, categories, groups, regions, I want us to also consider how schools and education are a part of that. So, in other words, we could consider schools and education to be a good, that's a cost or a benefit. We can consider that to be a defining social unit. And I guess it's up to us to figure out which one of those makes the most sense. Now he has a couple of different phrases that he uses, and let me go to this slide first actually. He talks about how durable inequality comes about, and he says it's the product of exploitation and opportunity hoarding to bring about the installation of what he calls categorical inequality. But it is also a product of emulation and adaptation, which brings about the generalization of influence from this categorical inequality. So this is how this first set of things is how durable inequality is about the origins or the creation of durable inequality. The second set is about the persistence. He uses the word survival. You could also call it maintenance because you're maintaining. Maintenance. I'm not sure I'm spelling it right. Of inequality. So on the one hand, we have an explanation for how durable inequality arises, its origins, its creation. And on the other hand, he provides us with an idea about how categorical inequality or durable inequality becomes generalized and persists across time, space, and culture. And he provides us a little explanation of what he means by each of those terms on page 10, again very early. So the two mechanisms that lead to the establishment of categorical inequality are exploitation and opportunity hoarding. Exploitation, he says, operates when powerful, connected people command resources from which they draw significantly increased returns by coordinating the effort of outsiders whom they exclude from the full value added by that effort. This is often going to be performed by the elite, or as Freire would say, the oppressors. Oppressors. Opportunity hoarding operates when members of a categorically bounded network acquire access to a resource that is valuable, renewable, subject to monopoly, supportive of network activities, and enhanced by the network's modus operandi. This is going to be something that is done by the non-elite generally, or it could be the oppressed. So we have two mechanisms that already recognize that there are the haves and the have-nots. And the haves are going to exploit, while the have-nots are going to hoard opportunities. Okay. He goes on further to say that mechanisms that maintain or help categorical inequality to persist, in other words, becoming durable inequality, are emulation, sorry, it's kind of hard to read there, emulation and adaptation. He specifically says, let me see if I can get this to do a highlighter. Ooh, look at that. He specifically says that emulation is the copying of established organizational models or the transplanting of existing social relations from one setting to another. Let me go back to my pointer. Doesn't want to let me do that color. There we go. Oh, still thinks I'm doing that. Hold on, I have to learn how to use my technology first. Now I want a different color. Thanks for putting up with me while I go through this. So, Emulation is the copying of established organizational models and or the transplanting of existing social relations from one set to another. All right. We have talked about this when we've talked about mimetic isomorphism. Mimetic simply means copying. Isomorphism means slow change, right? So mimetic isomorphism is a way of thinking about, another way of thinking about this emulation concept. Establishing organizational models, transplanting existing social relations, often models and social relations that have an unequal or unequal character in the first place. And then we have adaptation, which I'm going to go back to the highlighter. So adaptation, let's see what color I get now. Ooh, that's too dark. All right, adaptation is the elaboration, of daily routines such as mutual aid, political influence, courtship, and information gathering on the basis of categorically unequal structures. So, what does that mean? Well, when we have an adaptation, we are, again, to use this word normative, we could be copying, but we are establishing norms and values that have stability across time, place, and culture. Right? That is going to be this elaboration of daily routines. So these are things that happen on a day-to-day basis, but that we may not always recognize as inequality because they are also based on existing unequal structures. So it's a reproduction. Is a reproduction of inequality. All right, so now we have a couple of different things that we can start with. One is we're interested in how categorical inequality arises, survives, and changes. We're interested in how to apply that to education. We know that we're talking about inequalities that are durable because they persist over whole careers, lifetimes, and organizational histories, which we've shorthanded to time, location, and culture. We have an idea that human inequality has to do with uneven distribution, that could include social units, which might be schools or education, but mostly this uneven distribution is related to goods, which incorporate some sort of cost and benefit, and can be tangible but are more likely exchangeable. We also have the idea that there is a set of activities or actions that are exploitation versus opportunity hoarding, but both of those lead to the society-wide installation of categorical inequality and talk about the origins or creation of this inequality, whereas emulation and adaptation generalize the influence of this inequality and have to do with the persistent survival or maintenance of what that is. We are now interested in how to move forward with that in order to think about what actually happens in unequal circumstances. And we're going to be concerned with education as we move forward. Now we're going to keep doing conceptual analysis for a little bit, but remember I've promised that one of the later screencasts in this series on durable inequalities, first 4 chapters, will eventually apply it to an educational case.